Hello there. Welcome to another episode of Still Positive. I'm so glad that you're here, always and forever. So lovely to have you join us on this chronically ill and disabled roller coaster that we find ourselves in. I loved talking to Lori so much the first time that she came on talking about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and she had reached out wanting to come back on. I was like, absolutely. If you haven't checked out her first episode with Still Positive, definitely check it out. It's really great talking about living with EDS. And in this episode, we took a little turn and started to talk about sexual appreciation within the chronically ill and disabled world. It's definitely different coming from my experience having been sexually active before and after being diagnosed with a chronic illness. It is different. That, along with growing up just in general, you find out so much more when you grow up just about yourself and in your sexual identity, and it's a strange hand-in-hand situation that is interesting to navigate. Not challenging per se, but it is an interesting journey and different than your outside sexual identity. Does that make sense? Like your identity outside of your sexuality, that needs, I feel like, a different tender love and care than your inside sexual identity. And it can be the same for some people, but for me, I found that it's so much more inside of you. I am interested for everyone to hear this episode, and I'm interested to hear your feedback. Please leave me some feedback. Let me know what you think. If you want more episodes like this, give me a shout out, and we'll make it happen. But I hope you enjoy this episode. Let's be real. People love to gloss over chronic conditions or disabilities with a fleeting comment like, just be positive, or a fleeting insult like, kale will cure you. This is a podcast for when you face a different reality, knowing that positivity isn't a magic wand that's going to cure everything, but a flashlight in the dark that we may or may not have batteries to. Living with a chronic illness or disability makes you feel different, and your difference could be noticeable to others or not, but either can sometimes make you feel invisible. I'm here to tell you that your experience is valid and shared by others in the dark. Positivity is not the missing puzzle piece that's going to solve your life's puzzle, but it can be a beautiful tool that can help you grow, and sharing those experiences can make us grow together. I was so excited that you reached out to me. I was thrilled to have you back on.
Thank you.
And yeah, I loved our conversation, and I think that the topic of sex and disability is something that I feel like a lot of people are being more open about it, which is fantastic. I love seeing that. But I think that in your aspects and what you've written about, it's really cool to see the safety side of it and like the practical side that you're talking about, and pointing out the oh my gosh, fetish fetishization. I'm so bad. Fetish.
I'm the same. I have a slight lisp. Sometimes when I try and say a word, it's just like an entirely different language.
I know.
The people around me have to sort of guess what I'm trying to say.
I do the same thing. Clearly.
Yeah, at this point, like, because me and my girlfriend both have chronic fatigue, so our brains are just, we seem to sync with symptoms and flares and stuff like that. Oh, goodness. Yeah.
But talking about how people fetishize disabled bodies, and I think that is where a lot of people land thinking about this sort of stuff. So I would love to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, definitely. I think I see a lot more of the fetishization when it comes to people who particularly are more prone to being infantilized. So people who people associate if you need more care, if you need a personal care assistant and stuff like that for a lot of tasks, they see that as not having independence, and immediately with their ableism it goes to that's like a child, and it's not. And I think, I mean, we both know that, but it's something that I used to feel about my own care, and feeling like it was like being babied, but obviously then it was tackling that element of no, that's internalized ableism, you know. At the end of the day, ability and mobility is finite. Everybody at one point is going to be disabled if you live long enough to be disabled, and it's not a scary thing. It's not. And I think when you say that to people, it's kind of like weird for them to try and think about. But if that was you in that position, how would you want people to communicate or talk to you? It would be incredibly frustrating to suddenly have people talk to the person that you're with instead of you, or talk to you in a different tone of voice, which is pandering. And that can transfer to more serious and like mature conversations about stuff like sex and disability. I see so many people, whether I've personally interacted or not, but who receive a lot of questions regarding their sex life, which you would never ask. Like, because there's like this morbid curiosity, I think, for some people, and like they want to know these, like, what think of all this salacious detail, and like, oh, this is so other, but it's not. I, I mean, I always say no person's sex life is the same as another person's. So you can't just say that disability is one of the things that would influence a sex life, because it might have an element of restriction, might have an element of expression, but again, there's no way to guess what somebody's sex life is by just looking at their ability to move around, you know?
Right.
And I think people can be hypersexualized with their disability if their disability also feeds into society's expectations of body image. And it's something that I talk a lot about, like fat phobia and things like that. But very sadly, a lot of the time, the ideal standard is to be quite slim. And that's also an element that can feed into it as well, which I think is quite difficult. I think, as I've been there in that position, I'm not quite there at the moment, which is fair enough. But when I was quite malnourished, quite ill, I think a lot of people would pass comments about my body and things like that, that were things that you wouldn't really outright say to somebody who was able-bodied, in the way that it was worded. Like, "Oh, you're pretty for a disabled person." It's just, you don't need the end part.
Right.
What does it serve, you know? And it feeds into how we perceive our own sexuality, which is, it's quite a sad thing, because it's such an interpersonal part of ourselves for a lot of people, whether you choose to act on it or not, or whether you have any interest in it or not. But disabled people aren't automatically asexual because of their disability. Obviously, there are disabled people out there who are, but again, same with able-bodied people. It is what it is. But it's automatically a shock for people when, especially if you're in a relationship with someone. Very much so if it's interabled. Like, but how does that work? And it's just like, well, how is it any of your business?
Right, exactly. Who would you ask that to, you know?
I know. It's like the weirdest thing, just going up to people who you've just met and asking, like, so what do you guys do?
Right.
It's like, what?
That's literally none of your business.
It's like, we're not here to amuse you with our difference. Like, we're not here to make you feel better about yourself. We're not here to serve as anything other than anybody else would. But yeah, the infantilization, and then there's the fetishization, which is the part that I've had personal experience with, where people automatically assume you're submissive because you're disabled, which I think is quite an aggressive assumption, in my opinion. there's a lot that feeds into that, and there's a lot of pressures on disabled people to try and keep up to the same expectations and standards of beauty, to be deemed attractive and to be wanted, which is heartbreaking. And I know that a lot of able-bodied people feel the same, but speaking purely from a disabled perspective, I think we feel we need to make up for the fact. I felt that a lot. Like, I felt that pressure, even though it wasn't put onto me. I think that was clearly something that I carried internally, even in my sexual expression or my sexuality, or anything like that. And in doing so, I compromised. Never do that. It's not worth it. It's very suffocating, I feel. But obviously now I'm in a relationship coming up to a 1 year anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But we both have the same conditions for the most part. So I think, even though it wasn't all of my ex's faults, some of them, I blame them, some of them,
right,
for projecting ableism, I still think it shows how it impacted me personally, navigating into abled relationships, because of what I'd ingested over the years relating to my sexual worth as a disabled person. And again, having to try and make up for the fact.
Because there is the assumption, like you were saying, that there's a submissive role that's always going to be played. And it plays into when you're talking about aids and people being there for you to help you. It's odd that others would think that that's how you would want to be sexually, because it depends on the person, but you would think that they would want to be more dominant because of their everyday life.
Obviously, I can only speak from my own experience, but I found that for me personally, if I feel like I'm having to require more assistance or more help with some areas, even though I have independence by allocating that to someone, to a care assistant, it can be beneficial to then have the dominance in other areas, and to have that it's something that I can benefit from personally. And then if I feel like I'm dealing with a lot and that I'm having to take on a lot at once, that's when I see myself submitting that power, because it's nice, it maintains balance. And I know for everybody that's different, but
right. People can go fluidly into submissive or dominant roles, and it's not that you're pinned into one because you like one sometimes, and I think that rigidness doesn't have to be there. And I think that a lot of people have this idyllic vision of how sex has to be because of porn and everything, and it's so unrealistic.
It's like, this is how it should be, but nobody is like that.
Right.
So why is it there? So many elements of sex that aren't shown. And a lot of the time, the thing that I really hope to see more of, not just the diversity, obviously, but the active verbal consent and the active verbal communication within that scene. And it's not like assumed. Sometimes I think that the content very much plays into certain kinks, power dominance, things like that. But that's concerning for me, because then it seems like the narrative around BDSM and around kinks and fetishes is shaped because of that representation, even though it's not representation of it. Because again, a lot of the time it's like, where's the verbal consent there, and the respect that you would expect to be present? I do think it affects how you then communicate in your own partnerships, and how you communicate with yourself and your needs and what you want.
Yeah, and especially for people who are going through disabilities or chronic illnesses. I mean, looking at those situations and then bringing it back into reality, where I have so many different constraints in which, I have to like pause for a little, or like,
Exactly.
really
Yeah.
make sure that I'm okay and not like being hurt during the process
Yeah,
because
exactly.
they don't show. I mean, these women and men are doing this scene all day. Like they have different bodies than other people, and especially different bodies than disabled or chronically ill people. And that is not our reality. But we're holding ourselves up to those ableist
Mhm.
standards of, and it's not even ableist at that point because it's just a fantasy standard for every single person out there.
It is, yeah. But yeah, I think obviously it's you want to be bendy and athletic and hold all of these wild positions and then just like not be out of breath at all
Right.
and
Right.
like somehow look just the same afterwards and not be completely exhausted and need to sleep. I don't understand that because I've never, even in like my interabled relationships, it's never ever like that. They don't show the parts where you're like, hang on, I need some water,
Right.
or
Right.
you start sweating and you're like, my God, I need to open a window.
Right.
Or they don't show things like people who are disabled and just happen to be disabled in the film, and it's not made around the disability, which I think
Mm,
we need that representation too for the sake of disabled people, so they can see like a film that reflects their experience. But it's nice to just watch something
hmm.
like it doesn't have to serve as a source of inspiration. It's just something where you see an element of your reality reflected in the media that you consume without it being centered around that. Because if you think of typical media, a lot of the time, that's just not how it would work. It would just be a story where characters are integrated and yes, to have their own backstories, their own experience, but it's not very honed in on a specific element, it seems like, we're disabled people. And as much as our disability, we are entirely allowed to identify as that, defining us and doing that. But I think for able bodied people to see your disability as the defining element of you, it's difficult because they see you as other when our experience is different, but we are not other because of it. But yeah, especially getting back to the representation element, especially in mainstream media, never seen either disabled partnership or an interabled relationship or even a polyamorous relationship or anything like that that exists, like that's not really shown much.
Mm.
And it's certainly, if it is, like the interabled relationships, it's definitely fetishized. Not to toot my own horn or anything, but the relationships that I've had where there is like chronic illness that is there mutually, there's so much of an element of understanding there that I've just never had in any other respect. And even with friendships and things like that, there is that element of understanding. And I think that's so beneficial, and how that would transfer into the bedroom, it's such a necessity because it aids and facilitates communication.
Absolutely. So when you
Definitely.
were dating before you had partners, were
Mhm.
you open about being sexually active with other people? Because I feel like it is such a trusting thing that when I was dating, I was pretty lax about meeting people and going out and stuff like that. But I was also really young and not in the situation that I am now. And I was more like brutal with like my body. I feel like I was just like, whatever, I don't even care. And, just
Yeah.
like disassociation, all of this stuff. But I'm wondering for you when you were, if you were sexually active when you were single.
Mhm. I think it was the first relationship that I ever had was a very toxic and nasty one, honestly. And I think from that, even now, I'm still like realizing that the responses that I've shown in the past when it comes to recklessness or completely compromising my needs or not communicating my needs or not feeling able or allowed to, express what I feel, or it even it got to a point where I would just disassociate because it was trauma related to that. So it took a long time to then find and reconstruct what I actually want, because that was right at the beginning of when I was started to be sexually active. At that time, I was 17, which is legal in the UK. I just want to preface that for anybody in the States listening. Legal age of consent here is 16, okay? But that took a long time to reconstruct, what I wanted. I even, in all honesty, lost complete sensation. I think that was difficult to try and like get back and rebuild and trust myself with that. And it took a lot of time to invest a lot of physical and mental energy into rebuilding that element of myself. I'm really glad that I did, because if I hadn't, I think it would still be a very complicated element, and I get a lot of pleasure out of being sexually active, and that's something that is a big element of self-care too, because it's all of these things that aid in both your bond, I think, with yourself and with like what you want as a pleasure thing, and how you can provide that to yourself, and how you can engage in that with somebody that you love and care about. If I hadn't have worked on that when I did, which meant not being sexually active for a while, because it was at a place where, to be honest with you, it wouldn't have been healthy, because at that point it was, again, I hadn't learned to like essentially value myself at all. But then I started getting really ill around, I think, 19. I just slipped with my health, and then COVID. So, but a lot of it was to do with my self-worth, but also my health at that point was to a point where I was worried I wouldn't be able to provide as a partner, which, not that you should feel you need to provide, but to satisfy because you want to, But yeah, I think now there's so many elements of my health which have influenced my ability to express my sexuality, because I didn't have confidence surrounding it for a long time. It was even like the worry that I think so many people have of, am I normal down there? Like, am I okay? Like, is it, because we have such a fear, and I blame misogyny for that, surrounding our intimate health. And it's not so much, are we healthy and are we comfortable down there, it's, will it be something that people are appealed to?
Right.
That we would rather take over. In what world?
Yeah. It doesn't.
I look back at the types of things I used to think, and it's just like, oh, you poor bean.
I know, but there's so many people that do feel that way and
I know.
still feel that way. And then there's the other side of it where the misogyny and men expect that, and it's like that's outdated and disgusting. Like,
it is.
it should not
Because,
be a thing.
again, that's a big element of that is porn. The fact that, especially growing up, I was so self-conscious of every element of my body, to be fair, because I felt, again, I had to make up for the fact that I was chronically ill, but also because there's so many pressures, especially on young people, with how social media is, and that how plastic surgery is pushed. There was, even for purely aesthetics, not for comfort, not for anything like that, I was even thinking of something as drastic as a labiaplasty, which, now that I think about it, oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah, just, oh God, no. If that's something for a medical procedure for people to feel comfortable, do it if you need to. If it's advised, don't do it to satisfy somebody else.
Right? That's what I'm saying
Right.
too.
And
like, we go through enough surgeries and like doctor's visits. I'm not trying to do one optionally. That's okay.
I know.
For the pleasure of someone else.
But in doing so, we lose pleasure for ourselves.
Yeah.
And again, it's like the feeling to need to renovate our bodies to suit somebody's personal tastes, purely because we feel we're not good enough. It's so sad to think about now, but I understand, because I've been there, and I'm the most comfortable with my own intimate health within sexual relationship, than I've ever been. And again, that's partly because, my partner's great, but also because I'm comfortable. I don't feel like there's any unspoken expectations.
Mm.
But when you're in a relationship where you're so open about your health with each other, and elements of things like personal care, which is why caregiving relationships are so beautiful. And even if it's, two or more disabled people in a relationship, and that's an element of intimacy, I think it's so lovely to have experienced that and to still be experiencing that, because it's almost like finding intimacy and enjoyment within helping and caring for your partner and building that bond from there. So that's definitely something that I see a difference from when I was younger, and it was all about the satisfying of somebody else and hoping to find enjoyment for myself along the way. Never did, because again, it was compromise, and it was constantly being aware of, am I doing okay? Am I doing this right? As someone with hip dysplasia, sometimes your hip dislocates. Sometimes it's like, you're like, oh no.
Right.
But there have been times in the past where I look back and I judge myself so hard because I kept going.
That's the thing.
And that's the thing of like, don't let your health get in the way of this. It gets in the way of so much. And again, that enablers thing, but it's like, you want this person to enjoy themselves. They've had to sacrifice so much for you, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
And
blah, blah, blah. No way. You need joy.
Exactly.
Sure. Yes.
My God.
Yeah.
It's like a full-time job with my health. It's like,
seriously.
And now I'm self-conscious that it's getting in the way of somebody else's enjoyment.
I
And
know.
finding no enjoyment for myself along the way. It's like, what?
And the burden
again,
we
it's
feel
such
again.
yes, exactly. And I think a lot of it comes down to feeling comfortable and able to actively communicate with the person that you're with. And it doesn't always have to be because of how they respond. You can have the most loving partner in the world, but I think sometimes if we don't feel like we're worthy of expressing our needs, or we're self-conscious of certain things that might have absolutely nothing to do with them, but again, we might not feel comfortable expressing it to anybody. But it gets better to anyone listening. It can get better. It's great. Just invest in your sexual enjoyment. There are definitely ways to adapt a sex life to be suitable for you and your needs.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that you found were really helpful to like get to know your sexual life for yourself and your sexual pleasures?
I think a lot of it came from very independent and personal exploration, or I built upon that with somebody else. But because at that point there wasn't another person in my life, so it was for me to sort of to build that relationship back with myself and find that comfort to do so, because of past trauma and things like that. It was something that I kind of had to relearn, which is difficult to explain, because obviously sexuality and things like that will come naturally, but it was something I'd blocked off. So it was kind of just trusting the process with that. But it's just seeing where it led me, really, and being open-minded with myself. And if there was a specific, interest that I wanted to explore, to do so.
Yeah.
Because you might find a hidden gem.
Yeah.
It might be something that you're like, oh, this works, that you hadn't thought of before. So I think definitely do research about things like that, but prioritize personal satisfaction beforehand.
Yes. Yeah. Make sure you're enjoying it,
I know.
Getting
Otherwise,
something
what
out
is
of
the
it.
point?
Right. Exactly. Just to say you're doing it to keep young. I don't know. Yeah.
To be honest, I think that was something that aged me, if anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. Was there anything that you sort of did to help yourself communicate more with your partner during sex? Like, was there anything that you looked into, or was there any resources? Because it sort of feels sometimes like I'm just going to ruin the mood. Like, maybe this is just going to like completely stop this moment, but I just have to say, like, I feel like this is not the best position, or like this is hurting, or I don't know. And then I always feel like it's just going to be like a mood ruiner. But how do you feel?
Yeah, I think having the conversation when it's separate from that type of situation, so you feel most comfortable, because it can be quite if you do have that insecurity around expressing needs, just sit down and just talk about it, and say, this is what I'm worried about, and I don't want to feel like I'm ruining the mood, even though I know that, like, logistically it shouldn't.
Right.
But again, if somebody that you're intimate with isn't respectful of the fact that you need to be comfortable and you need to be enjoying yourself,
Yeah, right.
probably not the best fit. And again, if you don't feel comfortable because of their responses, it's I think there's always going to be someone out there who will, but you don't need somebody as well. But don't compromise your worth at all, because it will affect how you feel about yourself in other areas. Feeling like, oh, I need to. I think it's the people pleasing part that it transcends into so many areas of life, and even things like sexual health and sexual intimacy. It's just, I think the active communication is probably something to build on, but also in other areas of life, practicing that communication. And if you're not comfortable with a specific thing, sort of work on broaching and practicing how to bring that up, and how to sort of address how you're actually feeling. But yeah, I would say it's a lot of it is communication based, and I'm sure there are resources out there. There's a few therapists that are on Instagram who have free resources, and they are surrounding self-worth. And one of them is Tiffany Rowe, and the other, I think, is Fleur Dillis. I think it's Fleur Dillis Speaks, I think is the handle, but they have resources surrounding self-worth and self-care and acknowledging your needs, and how to sort of talk about difficult topics, but whether that is specific to sexual worth or not, I'm not sure if that would pertain. But again, I think it's just finding what works best and what you're comfortable with, really.
Yeah. And I think too, having the conversation beforehand is definitely helpful.
It makes you feel more comfortable in the moment. When I think maybe for some people it wouldn't quite be beneficial for them. For me, it's like, it's not just like it ends and finishes when you leave the room. Like, you're allowed to talk about that anytime. You're allowed to bring that up and discuss how you feel, and at any time. It doesn't have to be in the moment. You can do so whenever you feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Even if it's weeks later. It's like you're not on a time schedule.
Yeah.
And just that healthy communication with yourself as well. So understanding what it is that's holding you back from communicating how you feel.
Yeah, that's a great point. The exercising that muscle, that voice muscle of communicating your needs. And it does put you in
I
a
like that.
vulnerable
Yeah.
spot. It definitely puts you in a vulnerable spot, but I think that that's part of the acceptance, and the acceptance for the other person too, and them really understanding you better in your body.
I think it's also, vulnerability is okay.
Yes.
And it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's something that we're scared of, but really it's an emotion, and it's something that can give us a lot of information as to why we're feeling the way that we're feeling in that moment. But I think it's also practicing that vulnerability, especially if it's in a relationship, can be a real trust builder. You know, the more that, even in my own personal relationship, the more that I talk about things that make me feel particularly vulnerable, the closer I feel to that person because of how they are receptive and accommodating, but also building on, like you again, like you say, it's flexing that voice muscle. It's being more comfortable, you know, in that situation, in that environment, to express how I'm feeling. But again, I would never recommend continuing in a relationship with someone who didn't value sexual needs and your worth. Because being there, done that, it's really not. It's not advisable in my opinion at all.
Right. I totally agree. And I think that it can be scarring, like you're saying, for
Mm.
future relationships and for your future self, you know? And what advice would you give to someone who's struggling to find their own sexual self?
I think, to be honest, I used to be of the mindset of take the time for yourself first. As much as that was beneficial for me at the time, I also understand that that can also come off as being quite, you won't be as lovable until you love yourself, which is not true. Um, so I think it's important to work on yourself and I would say now, prioritize yourself, put yourself first. And if that means that you would feel most comfortable, you know, building on that part of yourself prior to going into a relationship, that's one thing, but it also doesn't mean that you can't be in a relationship as you work on that. Um, Again, investing time in self pleasure and making time for it to unwind and sort of find what works best for you. But I know we were talking prior to the podcast of accessible means of like things like toys and stuff like that. But because I know that a lot of the industry is very saturated with toys that might not be particularly accessible, whether it be by price or the style or anything like that for specific disabilities. And I haven't personally had any limitations, but I know that for I've had to make like adaptations for things.
Mm.
And I'm not sure if you've had like the same type of experience where you've had to make adaptations because of like conditions and things like that, but it's certainly something that I think there needs to be more of an importance placed to it in the
Mm.
market. And I know there are companies that do make accessible toys, especially accessible toys for people who are trans and things like that. I think there's just such a lack of support there, even though it might like to paint it as a fact of, oh, there's not the market for it, even though there is. But again, if there's a will, there's a way.
Right.
And there's always going to be something that you can access and that you can utilize to facilitate that self pleasure.
Yeah. And I loved the sensitivity that we were talking about from antidepressants or any sort of sensation loss. I think that the lube that you had suggested in one of your articles that increased sensitivity was a game changer. That's a great idea, and I've never heard of it before.
Yeah, I think that was like a Durex one or something like that, which I don't think was for internal use per se, but I know that yes, like there are. Which, to be honest with you, prior to actually seeing that, I just happened upon it in a shop. I was like, oh, that looks interesting.
Yeah.
So I'll give that a whirl. Because at that point, I was again open-minded when you go into it. Just if you think, oh, that looks interesting, that's probably your brain saying, try it.
Right.
Just see how it goes. And you might not like it, but again, it might be something that'll open a completely different door. But it was definitely beneficial for me at the time.
Mm.
I think now I've found like certain toys that work And I think, again, it all depends on things like function and weight and like texture and all of that sort of thing that'll play a part in it. But especially when I was at the start of my journey with it, that was definitely beneficial. As were like the soft like restraints and things like that, rather than something that's quite harsh. As appealing as they are, but then sometimes your body just isn't in a place where you can entertain that at that moment.
Right.
But yeah.
And I love what you said too about just like having fun with it. I think that that is lost sometimes when you're in certain situations, and it does feel like this mind game instead of just something like light and fun and meant to like be pleasurable for both people.
Exactly. I think there's a lot of pressure on it being more of a performance for the other person, as opposed to, because you look at movies and stuff like that, and it is a performance because they're being paid to perform. But that doesn't mean that we have to be good for them. But that nobody's sex life is like that.
Right.
And if it is, I don't think that comes naturally, because there's been times where, again, and I've fallen guilty of this. It's more so of feeling like you need to look like you're doing it how porn would idolize it, something. Not how it works.
Exactly.
It's just not.
Right. No. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you talking to us about just disability and sexual health and just sexual appreciation for yourself and for other people, and not having to tell anyone anything about your sexual life that you don't want to.
Exactly, yeah. Go out there and have your disabled hot girl summer.
Yes, yes. I love that. So before we sign off here, tell me a little bit about Project Parent.
So Project Parent is a completely separate and like related charity in what it does, but it's actually hosted by somebody that I know quite well, Kate Stanforth, who is a disabled ballerina and dance teacher and has done so much in terms of blogging and support work for ME and related conditions. But she spent a lot of time in hospital, and that meant that she saw how much parents sacrificed when they were there, which I think is again just part and parcel of it. But Project Parent is designed to create Christmas gift boxes for the parents on wards, so that they have a little something, to pick them up and sort of support them in that way, which I think is a wonderful act of care and a facilitator for respite. And I think it's fabulous. So yes, I know that the Project Parent website and Instagram page, see if we can link those if possible.
Yeah.
And Kate's Instagram as well, because she's pretty dope.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so sweet and very thoughtful, because the parents put in so much time and effort when coming with their children to the hospital, and
Yeah,
every appointment and the driving and everything that they have to do
it's
to,
very costly.
yes, and just giving back to
Yeah.
them. I love that idea. I think that's so sweet. Well, definitely. We'll link everything for Project Parent and Katie below. And thank you again, Lori. I love talking to you. So I appreciate your time and
Oh,
energy.
I'll be back anytime.
Yay!
I love this. I think it's fabulous.
Just have fun with it. I love it. Seriously, just have fun. Pleasure yourself, pleasure others, pleasure whoever you want. Just do it in a respectful, loving, and healthy way. That is the end game here, folks. Make sure to follow Lori for more updates on EDS awareness and disability awareness, chronically ill awareness. She has such great posts and definitely deserves some love. If you are actively looking for some self-love and awareness through the therapy pages that Lori brought up, make sure to check out the show notes below and like and subscribe while you're there. Give me a review. Make sure you follow us along if you want any more episodes, if you like this episode and want some more. And stay sick, folks. Keep it going, and make sure to check in next week for a new episode. I love you all, and do what you want. Live your love and live your true life. Thanks. I couldn't end without a weird voice.